Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Rowan. I'm the CEO of Humane Society International and also the Chief Scientific Officer of the Humane Society of the United States. And it is my privilege to moderate this session. I've spoken to the panelists and told them they had 5 minutes. I now understand they have 3 minutes. So we're going to do a sort of speed dating or speed speaking process here and go through this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introductions. You have complete bios for everybody in the package. So I'm going to start, Dan, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Dan Ash is the current Executive Director of the AZA and previously the Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Dan.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. 3 minutes, that's an unethical restriction on my freedom. All right, so I will just start by saying a lot of what I'm about to say comes mainly from my experience of 35 years in the conservation field and definitely 6 years as Director of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. I just start with a general proposition that, of course, we value human life over the life of other living beings. I can't tell you how many times I have sat in a congressional hearing room and been criticized by members of Congress for caring more about birds than you care about people. That is the dominant theological principle of our planet, that of course we put human life and human convenience over that of other living beings. Some of us may disagree with that, but it's evidence in our everyday life. But by choosing to be here, I have prioritized human society and value over the lives of other beings. I rode on an airplane, I consumed fuel. I'm consuming electrons in this room, which are powered by wind, which is killing birds and bats and butterflies as we speak. So, of course, we do. There is no animal life today that is not in human care. We live on a planet where our occupation of the planet is altering the very physical constituents of the planet, the temperature and the acidity of the oceans, the constituents of the atmosphere, the melting of permafrost and sea ice. Every living being on the planet is in human care. So I think with all that we do, including the operation of these things we call zoos and aquariums, it is our collective and individual responsibility to act with respectful intention and with integrity with regard to the rest of life on the planet, because it is all in our care. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Admirably brief. Claudia Gilly will be the next panelist.
I guess I'm the first one non-English speaking speaker. And we have very, very short time, and there are 3 steps that I would like to say. The first thing is that we're here to talk about zoo animal welfare, I guess. We're all sitting here to do this. And so I didn't get into details about whether captivity should be or should not be, because I dedicated my life to zoo and aquarium animal management and animal welfare in a very technical, at the start of my life and my career, and then getting deeper into ethical issues and welfare issues. And the one question I have posed to all the congresses and the people that I talk to about these matters is, are we really sure we know all the steps that we are addressing when we manage our animals? And did we realize that every single step dealing with animals involves ethical questions and criteria, and actually bioethical criteria? So I took an important course. I wrote a thesis on ethical matters. It actually won a prize. It was allowed to be presented in front of all the important silverbacks of veterinary medicine in Europe that deal with welfare. And I basically addressed all the issues that are ethical issues in animal management in a zoo and in an aquarium. And I tell you, it's very interesting because from this, you can tell from the very first minute you choose a species, from the moment of choosing the species, animal acquisition, animal including in the collection plan, to the end of its life, and further, what you do with the carcass and the dignity of the carcass to have a proper PM being done and carried out and find the answers, not only for that animal, but for the rest of the animals that are in the facility. This is very important, and this is something that all us are responsible for. And I'm pretty sure every single person sitting in this room that belongs to a zoological institution has this very clear in mind. So I expect to be sitting here and go forward and try to find answers, scientific criteria, scientific answers for all those steps where we still don't have some of the answers. And I really think this is our responsibility. And it's a responsibility because we take care of these animals. These animals are in our hands. I don't like to compare it with my child, but sometimes I do. And so and in Italy, we're considering right now to have ethical committees for every zoological facility to address all the steps of the population management. This could be an idea. There are many others, but I think we're here and to do this and to go forward. Thank you.
I'm not going to get the next name correct. There are 4 click sounds in Xhosa in South Africa, and Dr. Clifford Ngomani. So that's my best effort.
Yeah, that was harmful to my well-being. I think that we are here because we know and we believe that we can be better and that we can do better. With all due respect to our academicians here, we cannot pretend that zoos don't exist. And therefore, our presence here reflects our commitment to pursue a better situation and the best situation that we can bring about through what we do, the way that we do it, and also learning from what we do so that we can pass on those lessons in order to have a continuous improvement process that gets us as close to perfection as possible. From what we have, from what we are, from where we are. Not to a purely theoretical ideal that currently does not exist. So I think for me there are practical considerations. To simplify welfare and ethics, I think that there are 2 states. The first state is if you have a situation where the conditions under which the animals are living are harmful to them or distressful to them, presents you with a welfare situation. Knowledge and capacity to act to change that situation and failure to do so represents an ethical situation. And I think that from the latter, we are here because we recognize that one. They say I've got 1 minute. So the way I look at it is from a practical point of view. One, in our context, we have a situation where we were able to get our animals to game reserves that were in excess of our collection. Regulations are changing now such that the requirements for space are such that many average game reserves can't take on the animals that we consider to be excess. What do we do with those animals? We're going to end up with a situation of hybridization and over-inbreeding, which presents a welfare situation. So there are some practical situations that we must deal with. But broadly, I think that our presence here says that we are on a quest to change our current situations for the better. We need to understand what is a basic minimum level to work from so that we can also compare between institutions that have and institutions that don't have, so that we don't simply run to the good zoo, bad zoo situation. Also, we need to understand that there's knowledge, there are people that hold knowledge here of both practice and also of empirical work that must inform everything that we do in order for us to be better, in order for us to achieve better.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Terry Maple. You know, Darwin had a picture of people and their dogs and showed how the people looked like their dogs. Terry has long been a gorilla scientist, and he has now graduated to that silver-black status you can see from the color of his hair at this point in time. Terry.
You gave me this mic so I could remain seated, so that's what I'll do. First, I want to compliment Ron Kagan. He doesn't need any compliments, understand me, but I want to say this because what he has done in organizing this conference and many others, you saw his list of achievements, is exactly what all zoos should be trying to do. I certainly tried to do that in my 18 years at Zoo Atlanta, to bring people together, to bring up important topics, share information, and advance our ideas on behalf of the animals. Now, the smartest thing Ron ever did was to hire my former graduate student, Stephanie Allard. And we should give her an applause. Yes, we should. And this is, it's not just that I want to compliment Stephanie, but it's because if all zoos had the superior talent that I had at Zoo Atlanta, the brilliant students that passed through Georgia Tech and worked at the zoo over the years I was there, many, many things could be achieved. But the problem I see is zoos are not seeking or recruiting young, bright minds like this. We need to reach out to our universities. If we populated our zoos with more of these bright young minds, not just on our staffs, but with the time to work on animal problems that a graduate student can do, we would all be better off. So I encourage you all to become truly empirical zoos. And that means to reach out and form strong partnerships with universities in order to obtain interest and attention from the talented faculty and the talented students that can come our way. The things that they can do for us are remarkable, and we would benefit from doing the kinds of things that Ron does regularly, which is to have meetings for the public, for his staff, for the support group, who can reach out to the brightest minds in the business who are sharing ideas and, yes, sometimes debating them. And there's not enough of that in zoos. We're too closed to this kind of debate, and we need to open up. Now, I had a mantra when I was at Zoo Atlanta, which was fewer animals living large. I do think that's generally a good guideline for receiving the right population for educating and inspiring our public. But I do have to say that if the animal welfare science offers the idea that we need bigger herds and we need bigger groups in order to give quality of life, then we can't say stop breeding. And I take great effort here to say I disagree with that statement. We need to breed appropriately, ethically, but stopping breeding is not something that we should ever do. Finally, as I suggested, research has been significant in contributing to agricultural and biomedical reforms, and zoos have learned from this, and we too are contributing information to reform and advance our institutions, and we must make research a much higher priority. If we don't understand the animals we manage, we can't improve their lives. So study them, learn from them, generate information, because these populations are critically important to the world.
And last but not least, Dr. John Racanelli of the National Aquarium.
Thanks, Andrew. You've started it, Terry, so I'll continue the tradition here of using the mic at my chair. And as I tell you the story of my life in 3 minutes. Actually, there's 3 points I wanted to make quickly here, and that is that that zoos and aquariums are at a crossroads, that we are wrestling with the question of what's important versus what's relevant, and that there's never been a greater time for the need for trust as defined. And let me address each of those just in a moment's coverage. First, the crossroads we're at is that the model that has gotten zoos and aquariums to where they are today is no longer the model that's going to take them to where they need to go. You hear that, and we're going to hear that throughout the next few days. And yet tragically, we are not where we need to be in terms of adapting to those changing mores and standards. We're Blockbuster a year after we missed the chance to buy Netflix, and 6 months before we went bankrupt. And we have a chance to respond to that as opposed to just go into sector irrelevance. And there are good and bad zoos and aquariums, as you're going to hear more and more from my colleagues. We are aware of it, and we're all coming to the fact that we probably need to do something about it, about the bad ones. The crossroads is also one of public attitudes. As much as I agree with many of the things I heard earlier this morning about freedoms, the truth is that 85% of Americans are now living in cities or suburbs, and we're an urban aquarium, and the only contact that our guests have with anything that resembles the natural world is in fact what occurs on our campus in our aquarium. So it's an interesting challenge for us. That is one of the ways that we focus on this notion of relevance. No matter how much we know things to be important in our scientific and conservation-based model, we also have to recognize that they may or may not be as important to the public to whom we are trying to speak and for whom we exist. And so that relevance question has to be asked repeatedly. And then there's trust. We have this moral authority. Aquariums and zoos are trusted more than NGOs and government agencies for information about animals and conservation topics. But this trust comes with a price, and we need to hold this trust at a higher level, I think. We need to be more transparent. We need to be able to really convey what's going on in our facilities in a more open way. Not to use transparency as a weapon, but to use it as, someone used the term weaponized transparency. We need to be able to use transparency as a way to bond and build bridges between the multiple communities that are even represented in this room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I've got 2 cards already, and I have 25 minutes, so that will take us through to about 20 to 12, or 20 to 1, sorry. And so the question for Dan Ash about your comment that there are no living beings that are not in human care. And the question is it really that they are in human care, or are we caring for example, orcas in Antarctica? Are they really just at our mercy? So that is their survival. So question for you, Dan.
Could you say it again? I'm not quite sure I got the question.
You commented that there are no living beings that are not in human care, and the question is it really that they are in human care, I guess, as opposed to are they really just at our mercy? And so what...
Well, yeah, they exist at our mercy. I think that the human enterprise, we are occupying the planet. I think Cameron Kerr's graphic before showed the reality of human existence on the planet today. We're 7.5 billion people now. We're on our way to 10 billion people. So we are going to consume more of the ecological space on the planet. We're going to ask the planet to, and it's not just more people, it's more affluent people, more people that will be living like us. And asking for more fuel and more fiber and more food. And so all the rest of what we call biological diversity exists at our mercy. And that is the very notion of conservation. Conservation is a human principle, that we realize that we are impacting the planet and the other beings on the planet, and we desire to lessen their pain and suffering. And so that is the reality of the whole of our existence, and conservation is a necessary aspect of that. So zoos and aquariums, of course, the freedoms of those animals are constrained if they are in residence at a zoo or aquarium. But what, as John said, what we are trying to do is help educate the rest of humanity about what human proposition is doing to the rest of biological diversity. And if we can't do that, then the suffering of animals writ large is going to not just continue, it's going to worsen by the day.
Thank you, Dan. Next question is a question from somebody who says, those of us who work in the wild know many species have no immediate alternative to captivity for their survival. Is it ethical to deny a species that opportunity? Anybody want to take that on?
No. Sorry, that was the answer. I can't believe that it's ethical to deny a species the opportunity to continue to exist and hopefully to go from simply surviving to thriving and flourishing. And I hope that no reasoning person would take issue with that. It is an interesting fact that zoos and aquariums do a huge amount. And frankly, the elephant seal in the room, our friends at SeaWorld, do probably more work than any of us individually, and perhaps more than all of us combined in animal rescue. And that's a byproduct of the fact that company exists. And in our better moments, we know that that's a good thing. And yet, is there any conservation imperative to it? Probably not. Maybe in a few very isolated circumstances, most of the mega mammals and the turtles and the other animals that we tend to rescue, rehab, and release are not necessarily going to turn the tide, at least in the aquatic realm, between their survival as a species or not. But it is humane. It is the right thing to do. It is something that we spend a lot of money to do. Our government has increasingly diminished the amount of money that it offers up to the stranding networks around the country, and nobody has stopped doing it, and we never will stop doing it as long as we have the capacity to do it. So I think that humane consideration is hugely important, and I think it demands that we would, of course, do everything in our power to try to help a species avoid extinction, and that might lead to conversations about the vaquita.
And Andrew, if I could just, in general, I agree with John's answer, but it's like everything else, it's more complex than that, because is it ethical? If the question is a species is going to go extinct, but the condition of the human environment is going to be enhanced? That's the question. So is it ethical for me to say that people in remote Africa can't have the same life that I have, when I know that the life that I have has been created at the expense of the extinction of many species here in the United States? And so you can't just look at the ethical question from the viewpoint of the animal, because as I said, I think it's by far the dominant theological proposition on the planet is that human life and quality of life is valued over the life of other beings. You can disagree or you can agree or disagree with that. But so to say, is it ethical, depends on what the opposite side of the proposition is.
Anybody else in the panel?
Yeah.
Yeah, Claudia.
Just very briefly, the resources we have for conservation projects are always at a level. I mean, there's a limit to this. And therefore, taking a species that is not captive at the moment into captivity must always, always keep into consideration the possibility of release afterwards. If the environment is not there anymore, if the conditions for its proper life are not there anymore, we should probably always think how better use the resources. That's my personal point, but I think is a point that many people share.
Thank you. One of the issues I've long been interested in is education and the conservation education and the role that zoos play in that. And I was interested in Cameron's comments about how the topic has developed. And I do remember that a colleague went out and did a survey of visitors to the Great Barrier Reef Aquarium, and discovered that people who went to that aquarium got the ones who got the most out of it were those who tapped on the glass, right under where it says, please do not tap on the glass signs in the aquarium. Those are the ones who got the most out of it, because as humans, we like to feel that we're important and that the animal's responding to us. And then looked at the conservation value and found that the people who had been to the aquarium were less inclined to go and visit the Great Barrier Reef, which is good, less pressure on the reef. But they were also less concerned about conservation of the Great Barrier Reef because they'd just seen it in front of them. And so this is completely the opposite of what the sort of standard conservation measures is. And the question here is, what would zoo directors and trustees do if research indicated that the visitors to zoos learn little from their zoo experience and that zoos were ineffective or inefficient in that?
Well, that study has already been conducted, and I don't agree with the conclusions.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is it's very difficult to understand what people are paying attention to and how long they're retaining it. But studies are ongoing. There should be more. And I think if you don't question the motives of who does the study, if there is an objective study of that phenomenon, then of course we should continue to find this out. If our zoos are not performing up to the level they should be, then we have to be able to improve that. And I think that's what every good empirical zoo does. Now, there are a lot of ideas about education and other things in my new book. I'm surprised Ron didn't ask me to talk about this book, but you can find it on Amazon, Professor in the Zoo. I hope you'll buy it, because it does make certainly the point that there are complex issues that we are all dealing with right now. Finding out who we are and what we do and whether we're doing it well enough is one of the biggest questions that we have to resolve. But we'll only do it if we get more smart people collaborating with us, more young people with the time to work on it and become collaborative in this discovery process.
Anybody else on the panel with it?
I think that one has to be careful in terms of what do you do with research. And for me, the best approach that I've seen is what the medical researchers at least used to utilize, which was called the Cochrane Review. which is you sit down and you review the literature over 10 years or 20 years or whatever and see what the consensus is from valid research. And then you act on it because the consensus points in a particular direction. For one study to pop up and you jump around and take action on it is dangerous.
I will add that we in the zoo and aquarium world know that there has been a sort of a decay in the level of favorability and acceptance in the American public towards zoos and aquariums, as has been the case with many institutions, frankly. I mentioned earlier that decay or not, we still have a lot more moral authority than governments and a lot of the NGOs that we hold up as good models for global responsibility and the like. But it's not monolithic. This decline is present in the case of some of our colleague institutions and not all of them. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the San Diego Zoo continue to grow in terms of their reputational equity, people's perception that they produce valid conservation benefits to the world. They're not the only ones, but I find it really important that we pay attention, and this is based on big macro studies that have gone on over several years. Important that we pay attention to the fact that it is not a monolithic sort of sinking of confidence in and appreciation for zoos and aquariums. It is very specific to the missions and the activities of organizations like the two I cited. Wildlife Conservation Society is another. And I think that's important for all of us in the industry to pay attention to and think about what it is that is causing those other those institutions to gain those reputational equities.
Clifford, could I come back to you with a specific question about the challenges of educating a population that has a lot of people at a relatively low economic level where that, protecting wildlife may be seen as a luxury, and how would the South African National Zoo deal with that?
Yeah, I'm tempted to be controversial. Let me step back. We have to adopt a multiplicity of approaches, and we cannot adopt an approach that says, I'm right, you are wrong. I think what was said earlier here in the talks was to say that we must all work in concert for animals and not against each other. So I think that in terms of socio-economic development and the challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss and all of that, it's a continuum. And therefore, you've got to understand the audience with which we are working with, and therefore adopt appropriate didactic, if that's the right word, approaches in order to reach through to that audience and understanding the context where they come from. But I also don't think that you can, if we've defined progress in a particular way, you have to change the fundamental definition of progress before you determine whether other people can follow the same or different path to progress.
Thank you. Dan, another question for you about why are animals still being taken out of the wild, and specific reference to the Swazi elephants. So, I don't know how much you want to get into this, but
as have been stated here many times, I think the occurrence of taking animals out of the wild is becoming less and less. I think that and this kind of relates again to the question that John answered. If you ask a question that seems to be binary, is it ethical or is it not ethical, then it's easier to answer it yes or no. But the real challenges of working with and living with and conserving animals is never binary. There are always conflicting considerations and values at odds. And I think with the Swazi elephants, that was exactly the case. So you have a situation where the elephants are going to die or they're going to move. And people will always ask, lots of related questions. Well, can't they be moved here or can't they be moved there? It's like, that's not within my wheelhouse. So I'm being asked to issue a permit. And the question is the permit lawful or is the permit not lawful? I don't get to tell Swaziland that, well, if I tell you not to send the elephants here, then you can't kill them. Whenever you're faced with these choices, they're not binary choices. Because if they were, it would be easy. It's right or it's wrong. But in my experience, they're never, not rarely, they're never binary choices.
Thank you. Claudia.
I guess fish, marine tropical fish is an issue as well here. Usually people address this as a controversy towards aquaria. And the one thing that I'd like to mention is that Aquaria in the last 10 years have really addressed this very strongly. After Turning the Tide document that came out from WADSA, I don't remember the year, but yeah. But basically, there are many programs that increase the number of species that are addressed. And I speak about EASA and European zoos. We have FITAC programs, and actually the collaboration that is there is really providing a lot of babies. That's a good thing about fish. You don't have just one calf, but you have plenty of baby fish, and so I just want this to be highlighted. And I'm talking tropical fish because most of the other species are already being bred for many years.
So saltwater species breeding is growing apace?
Breeding has become one of the aims of the facilities. It has a lot of implications in terms of costs and travel and management. Other opportunities are the transport of larvae, baby larvae, that would be foraged on in the sea. So you capture the larvae, you transport the larvae in small boxes. You can transport hundreds of animals instead of one big fish that has a high mortality related to. And so the aquarium industry is really addressing this seriously. We have breeding programs for sharks, for rays, for lots of other species that are part of the aquarium collection.
Thank you. A question in terms of animals being in our care, and the fact that we as humans have not done a great job in terms of providing for that care over the past centuries. Isn't this just another excuse for, the fact that the animal's plight is simply going to worsen? So.
Isn't this another excuse for what now?
That the plight of the animals, wild animals, is just going to get worse. That when we say that all the animals are in our care, aren't we just sort of...
Well, it's not an excuse. I mean, for me, it's reality that, the dominant human beings are the dominant ecological force on the planet today. And human beings are going to exert greater ecological dominance on the planet tomorrow. So that's not an excuse, that's a reality. And as I said, conservation is our expression of value that we would wish to lessen our impact. We're not going to eliminate our impact, but conservation, education, those are all things that we do in order to hopefully lessen our impact going forward. And for me, that's the real value of zoos and aquariums. Is people are coming to these places. They're walking through the gates of their own free will, and they're being exposed. They're seeing things that they will, as John said, if you are living in inner city Baltimore or Los Angeles or Seattle or Minneapolis or New Orleans, you will have no other opportunity to see these things and learn about these things and what the human enterprise is doing to them. And so this is our best opportunity to create a future which is compassionate and respectful of our fellow beings on the planet. So not an excuse at all.
Any other comments? Anybody else, Terry?
A brief comment. In my former life, when I was asking rich people for money, I often had to deal with very wealthy individuals who wanted to give money, but they really doubted that it would do any good. They felt that these animals are on their way to extinction, and there's really nothing my money can do to stop that. So if you're in the business of asking people for money, as I was, and many of you are, you have to be an optimist. But the truth is, even if you're totally objective about this, while things are getting worse in many ways, there are many successes. And we have the capacity as human beings to make it better. I honestly believe that. You have to persuade others to believe that way because many of these things are happening that are totally out of our control. So in this audience today, I doubt that there are very many pessimists. I think all of you are in this business because you believe in the future and you believe you can do something about it. So don't let it get you down.
Thank you, Terry. Claudia?
Very briefly, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I work for one of the most successful aquariums in Europe. And actually, we made an important decision 6 years ago. We had a mission to increase awareness in the public and our visitors about aquatic environment conservation. We made the change into, that's the first sentence, and now is to promote positive and active behavior in our public. And I think this is a very, very important role that we have, to promote active, positive behaviors towards the environment, towards the conservation of the environments. It's not only understanding, but coming out of the aquarium and change your attitude towards things. Thanks.
Thank you. John, you were stirring.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Well, the question has been asked already, and I think it will be asked many more times in the next couple of days about whether we really can have an impact on the public. And I can at least cite one example, and then I'll mention one sort of motive and mission that we're on. We've been doing a regressive study on the impact of our Living Seashore exhibit, which opened 2 years ago, on people's attitudes about getting involved in activities that we implore them to do, and we give them an opportunity to sign on for right there in the exhibit. And a lot of kids, young people especially, will sign the thing, and I'm not sure they actually give us any feedback information, their email address. But we've doubled in the last year our volunteer count for people who want to be involved in plantings and coastal cleanups. And so we've actually deployed twice as many people out there. And the primary source for those increased volunteers has been the fact that we invited them to do so at the aquarium. So it's a step in the right direction. We're talking about the difference between 500 and 1,000 volunteers, and by now 3.6 million people have seen the exhibit. So in terms of total volume, it's still a valid question. To the other point, though, about whether we're just window dressing while the world burns. We're about to spend $12 million moving 7 dolphins to Florida or maybe the Caribbean and building a sanctuary. And, on the face of it, and to some of my more hard-nosed business player types on my board, it's not really a smart business decision. In fact, they would say it's a stupid business decision because you're taking the dolphins from Baltimore and putting them, 2,000 miles away. But we are doing it in part because of our commitment to those 7 animals and the lives that they lead and the lives they have led with us, and because we believe that it can be an inspiration for people to pay more attention to the plight of marine mammals in general in the wild. And so it is the right thing to do, however expensive it is. And I think that those kinds of steps are being taken by zoos and aquariums throughout the nation, and I think the better ones throughout the world. And it's not because it drives more people through the turnstiles, which is, I think, often thought to be the only driver. It is, in those kinds of decisions and commitments, it's because that's the level of compassion that the people who operate those places have.
And we will close at that point. I just want to close with one final comment. Terry was marketing his book there, and I've always thought that if I wrote my autobiography, it would be Confessions of an Optimistic Pessimist. Because you look at the data, and pessimism seems to be absolutely the order of the day, but if you want to get up and try and do something about it, you have to be an optimist. So I suspect everybody in this room is an optimistic pessimist. Thank you very much, everybody.